My name is Michael Anderson. I'm 34 years old, and my own father handed the family business I had bled for to my younger brother, a man who treated it like his personal piggy bank. Before I tell you how a single sheet of paper started a war in my own family and changed all of our lives forever, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know who's out there. The air in my father's oak-paneled office was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive whiskey, and a suffocating level of disappointment. It was my disappointment, not his. My mother, Linda, was perched on the edge of one of the wingback chairs, her posture ramrod straight, twisting a silk handkerchief in her lap until it was a wrinkled knot. My father, Robert Anderson, a man who looked like he was carved from the same granite as the mountains he loved to hike, stood behind his colossal mahogany desk, a fortress he'd ruled from for 40 years. And my brother, Jake, was leaning against the wall, a picture of casual arrogance, smirking as if he were watching his favorite sitcom. The announcement had come an hour earlier. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner for my father's retirement. I had been naive enough to think it was my moment. 15 years. 15 years of 60, sometimes 80-hour weeks. 15 years of postponed vacations, of canceled dates with my girlfriend, Sarah. 15 years of pouring every ounce of my intelligence, my energy, my soul, into Anderson Construction. Instead, my father had stood, clinked a crystal glass with a fork, and with a voice full of paternal pride, named Jake, my party boy, trust fund baby brother, the new chief executive officer. The ride from their house had been a silent, roaring vacuum. Sarah didn't say a word. She just rested a hand on my knee, a small, warm anchor in the churning sea of my rage. But I didn't go home. Couldn't. I went to my office, the real one at the company headquarters, the place I'd practically lived in for more than a decade. I sat down at my desk, a desk I now realized was just borrowed furniture, and I wrote. Now I was back in the lion's den. I hadn't knocked, just walked straight in. I held out the single, crisply folded sheet of paper. My father took it, an annoyed, paternalistic look on his face. What's this, Michael? A letter of resignation? That's a bit dramatic, even for you. Sleep on it. You'll feel differently in the morning. He began to read, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. I watched his eyes scan the first few lines. The smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. His brow furrowed as he continued. By the time he reached the final paragraph, the ruddy color had drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. The hand holding the paper began to tremble, just slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror I had never seen on his powerful face before. It was the look of a king who just realized his castle was built on sand. "Is this a joke?" he whispered, his voice cracking, losing all its baritone authority. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to show any emotion at all. My calmness was my weapon. I just looked him dead in the eye. "You made your choice?" I said. My voice as cold and steady as the steel beams we used to build skyscrapers. "Now I've made mine." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving the smoking crater of my former life behind me. The sound of my mother's sharp, strangled gasp was the last thing I heard as I pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. To truly understand the weight of that door closing, you have to understand the 15 years that came before it. Betrayal isn't usually a lightning strike. For me, it was a slow-acting poison administered in tiny, daily doses. It was 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small you barely notice, until one day you look down and you're bleeding to death. Let me take you back 3 years. We were deep in the Harrison Tower project, a 50-story beast that was set to be the cornerstone of our company's modern portfolio. It was our biggest contract to date, and everything was on the line. I got a panicked call at 9 p.m. on a Friday from Sal, our head foreman. Sal had been pouring concrete since before I was born. When he was worried, I knew it was serious. "Michael, you need to get down here," he'd said. His voice strained over the sound of wind and machinery. "The rebar subcontractor, they messed up. Royally. The specs are all wrong on the Southside foundation pour. We just caught it. If we let this set, the whole section will fail inspection. The whole damn thing will have to be ripped out. I was there in 20 minutes. The site was a chaotic mess under the harsh glare of temporary floodlights. A cold, miserable rain had started, turning everything into a slick, muddy soup. Sal was right. It was a disaster. The rebar grid was a tangled mess, a fatal flaw that would compromise the entire structure. If we don't fix this, right now, Sal said, his face grim as he wiped rain from his brow with the back of a muddy glove. We're looking at a 2, maybe 3-week delay. The penalty clauses in the contract with Harrison Group. Michael, they'll wipe out every penny of profit on this job. We might even end up in the red. My mind was already racing. While Sal started rounding up his guys, I got on the phone. I called the rebar contractor, woke him up, and read him the riot act in language he'd understand. He was liable and he knew it. I didn't yell. I just laid out the facts of the breach of contract and the financial consequences he would personally face. He had a new crew on site within 2 hours. Next was the concrete. The supplier was closed. I called the owner, a man named Henderson, on his personal cell. Gene, it's Michael Anderson. I've got a 5-alarm fire over at the Harrison site. Michael? It's almost midnight on a Friday, he grumbled. Can't it wait till Monday? If it waits till Monday, Gene, you and I are both going to be explaining to the Harrison Group why their tower is a month behind schedule, I said, keeping my voice level. I have a bad pour from a sub. I need a new delivery. 3 a.m. I need your best mix, and I need your best driver. And I need it at cost, because my other option is to go to Central Concrete and give them the contract for the rest of this build and the next 3 I have lined up. There was a long pause. I could hear him sigh. You drive a hard bargain, Anderson. Fine. My guy will be there. Don't make a habit of this. I didn't leave the site for 36 hours. I coordinated the crews, oversaw the demolition of the bad section, and personally inspected the new rebar installation. I stood there in the mud and rain as the new concrete poured at 3 a.m., the smell of wet cement filling the air. It was exhausting, miserable work. I survived on lukewarm coffee from Sal's thermos and the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. By Sunday afternoon, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, the new foundation was setting perfectly. The project was saved. The company was saved from a catastrophic financial hit. I finally dragged myself home, my boots caked in mud, my body aching in places I didn't know I had. I collapsed on the couch, pulled out my phone to check my messages, and the first thing I saw was a new post from Jake. It was a picture of him, grinning from ear to ear, on the deck of a gleaming white yacht against a backdrop of the Miami skyline. He was holding a bottle of champagne, his arm around a blonde model. The caption read, "Working hard or hardly working? Big things coming for Anderson Construction. #YachtLife, #Suointraining, #networking." He had told my father he was attending a vital industry conference. He had charged the entire trip, the flights, the 5-star hotel, the yacht rental, to the company credit card. I stared at the screen, the image burning into my brain. I was literally saving the foundations of our business, standing in mud and rain, while he was floating on the ocean, drinking champagne on my dime, on the company's dime, and calling it work. That was the essential difference between us. I saw the company as a responsibility, a legacy to be protected and grown. He saw it as a personal ATM, and my father encouraged it. He mistook Jake's reckless spending for ambitious networking. He saw Jake's flashy confidence as a sign of leadership. It was a pattern repeated endlessly, most painfully during family gatherings. I'll never forget Thanksgiving about 5 years ago. The whole extended family was crowded into my parents' formal dining room. The table was groaning with food, the air filled with chatter. I was feeling good. I had just spent the last 4 months orchestrating a complex but brilliant merger with a mid-sized materials supplier. It was a strategic masterstroke that would insulate us from market fluctuations and save us millions over the next decade. It was the kind of quiet, foundational work that doesn't make for exciting stories but guarantees a company's long-term health. I tried to explain it to my dad, drawing a little diagram on a napkin to show him the supply chain benefits. He listened with half an ear, his eyes already scanning the room. Good, good, son, he said, patting my shoulder absently. Solid work. That's my nuts and bolts man. Just then, Jake, at the other end of the table, launched into a loud, boisterous story about a trip to Las Vegas where he'd supposedly bluffed his way into a high-stakes poker game. It was an embellished, ridiculous tale that was almost certainly untrue, but he told it with flair. He was animated, laughing, charming. My father was captivated. He was roaring with laughter, slapping the table. Now that's a story, he bellowed, making sure the entire family could hear. This kid's got moxie. He's got charisma. That's how you get things done in this world, by taking risks. He looked down the table at me and winked, as if letting me in on a profound business secret. You see, Michael, you play the long game. That's smart. But sometimes you gotta go all in. Jake knows how to go all in. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. He had just dismissed my 4 months of intense, strategic work and elevated Jake's drunken fantasy to the level of high business acumen. In front of everyone. My mother saw the look on my face. She leaned over, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Don't mind your father. You know how he is. He's just proud of you both in different ways. But her pride always came with an agenda. It was a tool to manage me. The phone calls were relentless. Michael, honey? Her voice would be syrupy sweet. Jake just landed the pitch for the new mall project. Isn't that wonderful? The client loved him. There are just a few technical details in the proposal. You're so brilliant with that stuff. Could you just give it a quick look before he sends the final contract? I knew what quick look meant. It meant spending my entire weekend rewriting a 50-page proposal that was filled with impossible promises and faulty calculations. But I did it. Michael? Jake is having a little trouble with the budget for the Miller account. The numbers aren't quite adding up. You've always had a head for figures. Could you just help your brother out? Helping him out meant spending hours untangling a financial mess of his making. A mess so bad it was about to cost us a client we'd had for 20 years. But I did it. I did it over and over again. I told myself it was for the good of the company. I told myself it was what a good son and a good brother did. But the truth is, I did it because a part of me, a desperate, foolish part, still believed that my father would eventually see. That one day, the scales would fall from his eyes and he would recognize who was truly holding the company together. Ethan, my best friend and the only person at the company I could truly trust, saw it clearly. You're a chump, Mike, he told me bluntly one night over beers. You're the engine and Jake is the shiny hood ornament. And your dad is so busy polishing the ornament, he doesn't even care if the engine is about to explode. It's our legacy, Ethan. I'd argue, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. No, he'd shoot back. It's your dad's ego. And you're the one paying the price for it. Sarah, my girlfriend, was just as worried. She was a woman who had built her own successful landscape architecture firm from nothing, and she had zero patience for unearned success. This isn't just about the business, Michael, she told me one evening, her voice gentle but firm. We were sitting on our back porch, the only place I felt I could truly breathe. This is about you. It's affecting us. You're always stressed, always tired. We had to cancel our trip to the coast last month because of one of Jake's emergencies. When do you get to have a life? When do we get to have a life? She was right. The poison was seeping into every corner of my world. Just a little longer, I pleaded, more with myself than with her. Dad's retiring soon. When he does, he'll have to face the facts. He'll have to make the logical choice. He'll have to choose me. I clung to that belief like a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing that kept me going. So when my father gathered us all for that final dinner, the one to announce his retirement, I allowed that treacherous hope to swell in my chest. I straightened my tie. I squared my shoulders. I looked across the table at Jake, who was already on his 3rd glass of wine, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment of truth. Now, finally, everyone will see. And they did. I just didn't realize the truth they were going to see was that my entire life's work, my 15 years of devotion, meant absolutely nothing at all. The moment the words left my father's mouth, the cheerful clatter of the dining room seemed to die, replaced by a roaring in my ears. And so, with great pride, I'm handing the reins of Anderson Construction to a new generation. The new CEO will be my son, Jake. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I'm sure my face was a mask of disbelief. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the faces of my relatives blurring at the edges. I saw Jake's face clearly, though. First, a flicker of genuine shock, then a slow, triumphant grin spreading across his lips like spilled wine. He'd won. He hadn't even been trying, and he'd won. My mother, Linda, was the first to react, bursting into a radiant smile and starting a round of applause. Her eyes, wet with what she would call tears of joy, met mine for a split second, and in them I saw not apology, but a plea. Just go along with it. For the family. The rest of the family joined in, a wave of polite, enthusiastic applause washing over me, each clap like a physical blow. I felt Sarah's hand find mine under the tablecloth, her grip a fierce, grounding pressure. She knew. She had known all along. My father, beaming like a proud peacock, finally looked at me. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a conspiratorial gesture meant to say, "You get it, son. It had to be this way. You'll be there to back him up." I didn't get it. After the toasts and the backslapping and the endless congratulations for a man who thought a balance sheet was a modern art installation, I excused myself. I walked down the familiar hallway to my father's study, the sanctum sanctorum of his world. The room smelled of cedar and old paper and power. I stood in the middle of the room and waited, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. A few minutes later, my parents came in, closing the heavy door behind them. The jovial party host was gone, replaced by the CEO. "Michael," my father started, his voice a little too hearty, a little too loud. "I know this might be a bit of a shock." "A shock?" The word came out as a strangled laugh. "Dad, I have dedicated my entire life to that company. I run the operations. I negotiate the contracts. I manage the projects. Jake's single biggest contribution this year was ordering a new Keurig machine for the break room. And he ordered the wrong pods. That is an unkind and unfair thing to say, Michael." My mother interjected, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Your brother has a different but equally valuable set of skills. He has charisma. He connects with people." "He connects with people?" I shot back, my voice rising. "He connects with nightclub promoters and yacht salesmen. He doesn't connect with clients unless I've already done all the groundwork and prepped him on what to say. He's a parrot, Mom. A charming parrot." My father's face hardened, the forced bonhomie vanishing. "That's enough," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The decision has been made. Jake has the vision and the personality to be the face of this company. He inspires people. You're an operator, Michael, the best in the business. And he needs a strong number two. He needs your steady hand on the tiller. Nothing has to change for you. You'll still run your projects. Nothing has to change." The phrase was so insulting, so dismissive, it stole my breath. He was asking me to be the brain and the muscle for the handsome figurehead. To continue to bleed and sweat and sacrifice, only now I'd be doing it to prop up my incompetent brother, to make him look like the genius my father wanted him to be. "No," I said, the word quiet but absolute. "I won't do it." My father's eyes narrowed. "Don't be a child. Don't throw away your future, your legacy. Your name is on the building." "Is it?" I countered, the bitterness I'd suppressed for years finally boiling over. "Or is it just your name, and I'm just the guy you can't fire because it would be a bad look for the family? Am I an asset, Dad, or just a fixture?" Before he could craft a response, I turned and walked out, leaving the question hanging in the air between us. The following days were a thick fog of rage and disillusionment. I didn't go to the office. I didn't answer their calls. I walked for hours through the city parks, the anonymous crowds a strange comfort. Sarah was my rock. She didn't push or pry. She just made sure there was coffee in the pot and a hot meal waiting, a silent sentinel guarding my retreat. On the third day, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Meet me at the poorhouse," he said, his voice tight. "An hour. Don't be late." He hung up. There was no room for argument. The poorhouse was a dark, unpretentious bar, the kind of place where you could be invisible. Ethan was in a back booth, a grim look on his face. A manila folder sat on the table between two sweating beer glasses. "What's going on?" I asked, sliding onto the worn leather bench. "I did some digging after you told me what happened," he said, pushing the folder towards me. "I had a hunch. Turns out you were right about Jake's spending. But you were thinking like an accountant. You should have been thinking like a cop." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. It wasn't just a few questionable expenses. It was a systematic, calculated plundering of the company's finances. There were invoices, dozens of them, from a company called Golden Gate Marketing and Strategy. I'd never heard of them. The invoices were for vague services like synergistic brand consulting and strategic outreach amplification. The total was staggering, over $200,000 in the last 12 months alone. Ethan had done his homework. He'd run a check on the company. It was a shell corporation, registered to a P.O. box. And the payments weren't going to a corporate account. Ethan had managed to get a copy of a cash check from a source in accounting. It was made out to a personal account. Jake's personal account. It wasn't just recklessness. It wasn't just entitlement. It was felony-grade embezzlement. There was more. Scanned receipts for a $5,000 watch. A down payment on a sleek, black sports car I'd never seen. Rent payments on a luxury penthouse apartment downtown I didn't even know he had. He wasn't just living off the company. He was gutting it. "He's been stealing from you, Mike," Ethan said, his voice a low, furious rumble. "He's been stealing from your mom and dad. This isn't a family squabble anymore. This is a crime." A strange, cold calm washed over me. The hurt, the anger, the confusion. It all melted away, replaced by a single hard point of clarity. This was it. This was the silver bullet. This was the one thing my father could not dismiss. He was an old-school man of honor. A thief was a thief. He would have to see. I drove straight to my parents' house, the manila folder a dead weight on the passenger seat. I found my father in his study, poring over blueprints. He looked up, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Michael, I'm glad you've come to your senses. We can make this work." I didn't say a word. I walked to his desk and placed the open folder directly on top of his blueprints, pointing to the Golden Gate invoices. "What is this?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. He picked up a sheet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Golden Gate Marketing? I don't recognize them. 200 grand? That's steep. Jake should have run this by me." "The company is a P.O. box, Dad," I said flatly. "And the money was wired directly into Jake's personal savings account. It's called embezzlement." I watched him read, my gaze unwavering. I watched his face shift from confusion to dawning comprehension, and then to something else. Something I didn't expect. Denial. He wasn't getting angry. He was getting defensive. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window, turning his back on me and the evidence on his desk. There has to be an explanation," he said, his voice tight. "A misunderstanding. Maybe it was a bonus that wasn't processed correctly." I let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "A bonus? Dad, he faked invoices from a company that doesn't exist. He's a thief. He's committing fraud. This is a felony that could land him in prison and destroy the company's reputation forever." He spun around, his face a mask of crimson rage. But the rage wasn't for Jake. It was for me. It was for the son who dared to bring this ugly truth into his sanctuary. "And what do you want from me, Michael?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. "Do you want me to call the police on my own son? Do you want to see him in handcuffs? Is that what this is about? Ruining him? Ruining this family? I want you to see the truth," I yelled back, my own control finally shattering into a million pieces. I want you to see who you just handed your father's company to. I see the truth just fine, he bellowed, jabbing a thick finger in my direction. I see a son who is so consumed with jealousy that he's willing to destroy his own brother. You couldn't stand that I chose him, so you went digging for dirt to try and tear him down. This isn't about the company. This is about your own wounded pride. That was it. That was the kill shot. It wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was a complete character assassination. In his mind, to protect the fragile image of his golden boy, he had recast me as the villain. I wasn't the loyal son. I was the jealous monster. The fight drained out of me, replaced by an emptiness so profound it felt like a physical hole in my chest. He would never see. He didn't want to see. I walked back to the desk and calmly gathered the papers, sliding them back into the manila folder. You're right, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. The terrifying calm was back. It was foolish of me to think the truth mattered to you. I turned and walked out of that study for the last time, the folder clutched in my hand like a verdict. This was no longer about trying to save them from themselves. This was about saving myself from them. The drive away from my parents' house was eerily silent. The roaring in my head had stopped. The pain was still there, a dull, heavy ache behind my ribs, but it was overshadowed by a chilling, absolute clarity. My father's words hadn't just been an accusation. They had been a release. He had severed the final tie of filial duty that had bound me to his flawed vision. I was no longer a son trying to earn his father's approval. I was a free agent, and that freedom was a powerful, dangerous thing. I didn't go home. I couldn't face Sarah's sympathetic eyes just yet. I needed to channel this cold, clean anger into something productive. I went to my home office, a room that had always been my sanctuary for side projects and quiet thinking. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't thinking about the next 5 years for Anderson Construction. I was thinking about the next 48 hours for Michael Anderson. For 2 straight days, I worked with a focus I had never known. Fueled by gallons of black coffee and the righteous fire of a man with nothing left to lose, I began to construct my weapon. It wasn't a bomb. It was a surgical instrument designed to cut away a cancer. I created a file on my computer and named it, simply, the Transition Proposal. It began with a brutal, honest assessment of Anderson Construction. I knew its secrets better than anyone. I detailed its operational inefficiencies, the outdated project management software my father refused to upgrade, the dangerous over-reliance on a handful of legacy clients, the bloated overhead, padded with Jake's exorbitant marketing expenses and the salaries of his useless friends. It was a clinical autopsy of a dying business. The second section was the vision. It was a comprehensive business plan for a new kind of construction firm. Lean, technologically advanced, and ruthlessly efficient. I outlined a strategy based on diversification, aggressive bidding on forward-thinking projects, and a flat corporate structure. I detailed a company culture built on a single radical idea, meritocracy. The best ideas would win regardless of who they came from. Hard work and results would be rewarded, not your last name. It was the company I had always dreamed of building. The one Anderson Construction could have become if not for my father's stubborn nostalgia and my brother's corrosive incompetence. I created an organizational chart. At the top, a CEO. Beneath that, a lean team of proven performers. I wrote their names down: Ethan Carter, Chief Operating Officer; Jessica Miller, the sharp, no-nonsense head of accounting, as Chief Financial Officer; Sal, the grizzled site veteran, as head of site management. These were the pillars of the old company, the people who actually got things done. Their loyalty wasn't to the Anderson name on the sign. It was to the quality of the work, to the standards I had always fought to uphold. The final section was the kill shot. It was a detailed risk analysis, a financial forecast of what would happen to Anderson Construction if I, and the key personnel I'd listed, were to suddenly depart. The projections were not emotional. They were cold, hard numbers. Key projects, like Harrison Tower, would immediately stall without my oversight and relationships. With Ethan gone, operational logistics would collapse. Without Jessica, financial controls would evaporate. The penalty clauses from angry clients would trigger a cascade of losses. Within 6 months, the company my grandfather had poured his life into would be insolvent. It wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis. With the proposal complete, I scheduled 2 critical meetings for the following day. The first was with Emily Carter, Ethan's wife. Emily was one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in the city. I laid everything out for her in her sterile, glass-walled office. The family drama, the embezzlement evidence, and my transition proposal. She listened without interruption, her face a mask of professional neutrality. When I finished, she tapped a long, elegant finger on the folder of evidence against Jake. "This is your leverage, but it's also a landmine," she said, her voice crisp and precise. "If you use this to explicitly threaten them, to say, 'Give me the company or I expose Jake,' that's blackmail. It's illegal and it makes you the bad guy. But," she continued, a slight smile touching her lips, "if you frame your departure as a necessary business decision and hold this in reserve as your defense against any potential legal action from them, like a lawsuit for breach of contract or tortious interference, then it's not blackmail. It's insurance." She then walked me through my employment contract. The non-compete clause is poorly written. It prevents you from founding a directly competing entity for 12 months. It says nothing about being hired as a turnaround specialist to save a failing one. The language gives you an opening. She gave me a clear, legal pathway. I left her office feeling not just angry, but armed. My second meeting was the one that mattered most. It was with Tom Edwards, the CEO of our largest client. Tom was old school. He was tough, shrewd, and had a built-in detector for nonsense. Our relationship was built on years of me delivering results, often in spite of the chaos caused by my family. We met for a scotch at the quiet, mahogany-paneled bar of the Fairmont Hotel. I didn't waste time with small talk. "Tom, I need to speak with you frankly," I began. "I'm going to be leaving Anderson Construction." He didn't flinch. He just swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly. "Can't say I'm surprised, Michael. I was surprised when your father made that announcement. The boy's a fool. Always has been." My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was it. "I'm not just leaving, Tom," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I have a plan. A plan to ensure that the projects we have together, and all future projects, continue without a single interruption under proven, stable leadership. But it would require a leap of faith. It would require you to move your portfolio away from Anderson Construction." I didn't show him the proposal. I didn't need to get into the weeds. I sold him the vision. I sold him on a new, more efficient partnership. I sold him on a team led by me, Ethan, and the other key players he already knew and trusted. I was asking him to bet on the jockey, not the horse. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on mine. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, just staring into his glass as if the future were swirling in it. My confidence began to feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. Finally, he looked up, his eyes sharp and clear. "Michael," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I've been in this game for 40 years. I've seen dozens of family businesses implode. It's almost always rot from the inside. You've never lied to me. You've never missed a deadline you didn't warn me about well in advance. You've always delivered." He paused, taking another slow sip. My world hung in that pause. "I can't sign a piece of paper with you today. That's not how the world works, and you know it," he said. "But I will tell you this." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "You get your house in order. You make your move. And when you are in a position to make me a formal proposal, you call me. I will be ready to listen." He stood up, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, and gave it a firm squeeze. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a transfer of power. "Good luck, son. Looks like you're about to make your own." It wasn't a legally binding contract, but it was more valuable. It was a green light from the one man whose support could make or break my entire plan. That night, I went home and laid everything out for Sarah. The whole ugly saga. The proposal. The meetings. She listened to every word, her expression shifting from anger on my behalf to a fierce, quiet pride. When I was finished, she simply wrapped her arms around my neck and held me. "It's about time, Michael," she whispered. "It's about time you fought for you." Later that night, I sat down at my desk one last time. It was time to stop planning and start acting. I wrote a letter. It was very short, very formal, and it was the fuse. This is the part of the story you've been waiting for. This is where the long, slow burn finally ignites into a full-blown inferno. The next morning was a crisp, clear Saturday. The kind of beautiful autumn day that felt completely at odds with the ugliness I was about to unleash. I drove to my father's house, the house I grew up in, and walked through the front door without knocking. I found him in his study, just as I knew I would be. He was on the phone, laughing about a golf game. He saw me and his smile faltered. He quickly ended the call. "Michael," he said, his tone wary. "What is it?" I didn't say a word. I just walked to his desk and placed the letter on his leather blotter. The one from the very beginning of my story. Now, you know what was inside. It wasn't a resignation. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a corporate maneuver, as cold and hard as steel. It read, "Robert, pursuant to Article 3, Section 2 of the bylaws of the Anderson Construction Corporation, I am formally requesting an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors and all family shareholders. The meeting is to take place tomorrow, Sunday, at 10 a.m. in the main office boardroom. The sole item on the agenda will be a vote of no confidence in the current leadership and a discussion regarding the immediate future of the company. I will be presenting indisputable evidence of gross financial misconduct and embezzlement by the newly appointed CEO, Jake Anderson. Failure to attend will be noted in the official minutes and interpreted as an abdication of fiduciary responsibility. Sincerely, Michael Anderson." That was why his face had drained of color. That was why his hand had trembled. It wasn't a son having a tantrum. It was a shareholder, a director, exercising his legal rights. It was a formal declaration of war, played by the very rules of the game he had taught me. I hadn't just run away from home. I was coming back with a battering ram to take down the castle walls. The next morning, the atmosphere in the third-floor boardroom was so tense you could taste the static electricity in the air. It was a room designed to project power, with a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine and a panoramic view of the city skyline. But that day it felt like a cage. My mother was there, her face a mask of pale fury, her eyes shooting daggers of ice at me. My uncle and aunt, who were minor shareholders and hated conflict, sat huddled together, looking like they wished the floor would swallow them whole. Jake was there, attempting an air of bored indifference, but the continuous, rhythmic drumming of his fingers on the table betrayed his terror. And at the head of the table sat my father, his face a grim, unreadable slab of granite. I had made one final phone call that morning. "Tom," I'd said, "the meeting is at 10. As our largest client, and therefore a primary stakeholder in our stability, I believe your presence as an observer would be invaluable." And so there he was, Tom Edwards, sitting quietly in a chair against the wall, not at the table, but his presence dominated the room. He wasn't a participant. He was the audience for whose benefit this entire drama was about to unfold. His being there transformed a messy family feud into a legitimate business crisis. My father rapped his knuckles on the table, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "This emergency meeting is called to order," he said, his voice strained. "Michael, you demanded this circus. The floor is yours." I stood up, my own proposal binder in front of me. I didn't look at my family. I looked at the room as a whole, my voice calm and measured. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not here today to air family grievances. I am here as a director of this corporation to address a clear and present danger to its survival." I started with the embezzlement. I didn't yell or accuse. I simply presented the facts. Using the room's projector, I displayed the fraudulent invoices from Golden Gate Marketing. I showed the bank statements with the wire transfers. I displayed the scanned receipts for the watches and the sports car. I walked them through it step by step, my tone as clinical as a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. Jake leaped to his feet, his face red and blotchy. "This is garbage. It's slander. He's twisting things, making it all up because Dad chose me and not him." It's jealousy. Sit down, Jake, my father commanded, his voice a low growl of embarrassment. I would be happy to discuss the specifics of synergistic brand actualization. Jake, I said, turning to him, my voice still level. Perhaps you can enlighten the board as to what services precisely were rendered for over $200,000 of the company's money. Jake opened his mouth, a torrent of blustering denials on his lips. But then he saw the look in Tom Edwards's eyes. A look of utter contempt. The words died in his throat. He collapsed back into his chair, defeated. My mother began to cry, not loudly, but with small, sharp, gasping sobs of a woman watching her world crumble. But I wasn't finished. This was never just about Jake. It was about the entire rotten culture he represented. The embezzlement, however, is merely a symptom. I continued, my voice gaining strength and passion. A symptom of a larger disease. A failure of leadership, a failure of vision, and a failure of fiduciary duty. And then, I took them through my transition proposal. I put up slide after slide, showing them the company's financial vulnerabilities in stark black and white. I showed them the operational inefficiencies. I showed them the path they were on, a path leading directly to insolvency. Then I showed them the other path, my plan. A new structure, new technology, a new philosophy, a new future. When I finished, a profound, stunned silence filled the room. In the space of 20 minutes, I had not only proven Jake a criminal, but I had also systematically dismantled my father's 40-year legacy, exposing it as outdated and fragile. My father finally spoke, his voice heavy, thick with a pain that was almost tangible. What is it you want, Michael? What is the point of all this? To publicly humiliate your family. I finally allowed my gaze to lock with his, and for the first time, looking at the broken man before me, I felt a flicker of pity. No, I said, my voice softening almost imperceptibly. I'm here to give this board a choice. The choice you should have made a week ago. I looked around the table, from my uncle's terrified face to my aunt's tear-streaked one. I am not asking for a job. I am presenting a rescue plan. The board can vote right now to remove Jake as CEO and install me with full, unimpeded operational control to execute this turnaround. If you do, I will stay. I will fix this. We will handle Jake's legal troubles internally and quietly. We will save this company and the jobs of the 200 people who work for it. I paused, letting the weight of that offer sink in. Or, I continued, my voice hardening again, you can vote to maintain the status quo, to stand by the current leadership. And if that is your choice, then I will tender my resignation, effective immediately. And when I walk out that door, I will not be alone. Ethan Carter, Jessica Miller, Sal, and the best damn construction foreman in this state will walk out with me. We will go and we will build this new company I have just outlined for you. I turned my head and looked directly at Tom Edwards. And we will take the Edwards construction account and every other major client I have personally cultivated for the last decade with us. The ultimatum hung in the air, a sword over my father's head. The room was a vacuum. Everyone was looking at Robert Anderson. He was trapped. He looked old, shrunken, a titan turned to dust. And then, the voice that broke the spell was not his. It was Tom Edwards's. He stood up slowly, a deliberate, powerful movement that drew every eye in the room. He looked at my father, a flicker of what might have been sorrow in his eyes. But he spoke to the entire room. Robert is my friend, he said, his voice a gravelly but firm rumble. And I have been doing business with the Anderson name for a very long time. But my business, my own legacy, depends on stability. It depends on competence. It depends on results. He then turned his sharp, clear gaze to me. Michael Anderson has delivered those results for me without fail for 10 years. He has never let me down. Finally, he looked back at my father, and with a voice that held no malice, only the cold, hard logic of business, he delivered the final, fatal blow. The choice, of course, belongs to this board, but I am putting my money, my contracts, and my faith in the best damn manager in this room. And as of this moment, that is Michael. It was over. Checkmate. The war was won, not with a quiet letter, but with a public execution in the very boardroom my grandfather had built. I hadn't just taken the castle. The kingmaker had just handed me the crown in front of the entire court. The moments after Tom Edwards delivered his verdict were like the eerie silence after a massive explosion, where the air itself seems to be holding its breath. The polished mahogany table, which had been a symbol of my father's power for decades, now felt like a funeral slab. My uncle, David, a mild-mannered accountant who usually avoided any form of confrontation, was the first to break. He cleared his throat, the small sound echoing in the tense quiet. "Robert," he said, his voice wavering but resolute. We have to do what's right for the company. For all of us. I vote in favor of Michael's proposal." His wife, my Aunt Carol, immediately followed suit, her voice a reedy whisper. I do too. I vote for Michael." My father didn't even acknowledge them. He was staring down at his own hands, clasped on the table, as if seeing them for the first time. The hands that had built an empire were now trembling. He had been the undisputed king in this room, his word law. Now, he was just a man who had been publicly outmaneuvered and neutered by his own son, in front of his most important client. He slowly raised his head and looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a toxic cocktail of rage, regret, and utter defeat. He gave a single, sharp, jerky nod. "The motion carries," he ground out, each word tasting like ash in his mouth. A strangled, animal-like sound escaped from Jake's throat. He shoved his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor, and he stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy door so hard the glass in the frame rattled. My mother, her face a pale, contorted mask of pure hatred, gave me a look that could have curdled milk, then gathered her purse and hurried out after her broken, favorite son. I was left in the room with my father and the ghosts of what our family used to be. My uncle and aunt, after mumbling a few awkward, half-hearted words of congratulations, practically fled the room, desperate to escape the emotional wreckage. And then it was just the two of us, father and son, the new king and the deposed one. "Are you happy now?" he asked, his voice a hollow shell of its former self. "You've won. You got what you wanted. You've humiliated your brother. You've humiliated me in front of Tom Edwards." "This was never about winning or losing," I said, and I was surprised by the deep weariness in my own voice. The adrenaline of the fight was draining away, leaving behind the profound ache of what had been lost. This was about survival. You were going to let Jake drive this company into a ditch, and you were going to stand by and watch as long as he looked good doing it. "He's your brother," he exclaimed, a spark of his old fire returning. "You're supposed to look out for him. And you're my father." I shot back, my own voice rising to meet his, the years of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. A father is supposed to be fair. A father is supposed to see his children for who they truly are, not who he wishes they were. You looked at Jake and you saw a younger, more charismatic version of yourself, the salesman you always prided yourself on being. And you looked at me and saw a boring, reliable manager, the guy you needed to clean up the messes. You never once just saw me. The accusation, raw and true, hung in the air between us. It was a truth he couldn't deny. He had no answer. He just sagged back into his high-backed leather chair, looking frail and old, a stranger in his own kingdom. The most difficult confrontation, however, was yet to come. Later that evening, I went back to the family home. I had to pick up some personal belongings from my old bedroom, things I hadn't had a chance to move out yet. I had prayed the house would be empty. My prayers weren't answered. My mother was waiting for me at the bottom of the main staircase, her arms crossed, her body as rigid as a statue. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her eyes were hard and cold. "I can't even look at you," she said, her voice low and trembling with venom. "After everything this family has done for you, the opportunities, the support. I stopped on the stairs, a box of old college textbooks in my arms. "Mom, what support are you talking about?" I have spent my entire adult life supporting this family. I have been your handyman, your fixer, your cleanup crew. Every time Jake screwed up, who did you call? Every time a project was about to go off the rails, whose weekend got sacrificed. We are a family, she cried, her voice cracking, the hysteria beginning to bubble up. And families are supposed to protect each other. You are supposed to protect your brother. He is sensitive. You have destroyed him. And in that moment, in her twisted logic, I finally understood her core motivation. It was never about fairness or business. It was about fear and control. You don't want a family, Mom, I said, setting the box down on the step with a soft thud. My voice was quiet, but it seemed to slice right through her emotional storm. You want a solar system with you as the sun. You kept using me to enable Jake, not because you thought he was capable, but because you knew he was weak. You were terrified that, without the company and the family money propping him up, he'd be lost. And you were just as terrified of me. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. You were scared to death that if I ever truly understood my own value, I would leave. I continued, the words pouring out of me now. That I'd build my own life, my own world, and you wouldn't be the center of it. So you tried to chain us both here. You tried to chain Jake with your enabling, and you tried to chain me with guilt and a sense of duty. Your love, it wasn't a gift, Mom. It was a leash. The raw truth of the words struck her silent. I had articulated the ugly, selfish fear that lived in the deepest part of her heart, and she had no defense against it. I am not your tool anymore, I said, my voice heavy with finality. And I am not Jake's keeper. That part of my life is over. I picked up my box of books. I have a company to run. It's going to take everything I have to save it from the damage you and Dad and Jake have done. I walked past her, down the stairs, and out the grand front door of the house that had never truly felt like a home. I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, her tears, her guilt, her twisted sense of love, might just pull me back in. This time, the cut had to be clean. It was the only way any of us would ever have a chance to heal. The 6 months that followed were a grueling education in what it truly means to lead. They were, without a doubt, the hardest and most profoundly satisfying months of my life. Taking the helm of Anderson Construction was nothing like the triumphant victory lap some might imagine. It was more like being named captain of a ship that was already taking on water, with a skeptical crew and a storm on the horizon. I immediately began the process of rebranding, changing the name to Anderson and Partners. The "and Partners" was crucial. It was a signal, both internally and externally, that this was no longer a family fiefdom. It was a professional enterprise. The first challenge was the company culture itself, which had grown stagnant and cynical under my father's reign and downright toxic during Jake's brief, chaotic tenure. I discovered departments padded with Jake's unqualified friends, people drawing salaries for doing next to nothing. There were ancient, inefficient processes institutionalized simply because that's how we've always done it. And then there was the human element, the resistance. It wasn't overt. It was in the quiet whispers by the coffee machine, the resentful glances from older employees who had been loyal to my father for decades. In their eyes, I wasn't a savior. I was a usurper, the treacherous son who had staged a coup. Earning their trust was my first and most important job. I didn't do it with grand speeches or flashy gestures. My father was right about one thing. I lacked his brand of charisma. My leadership style was built on something else: relentless work and visible competence. I was the first person to arrive at the office each morning and the last one to leave. I traded my suit for a hard hat and spent hours walking the construction sites with Sal, not giving orders, but asking questions. What's the biggest bottleneck here? What equipment do you need? What's the stupidest piece of paperwork I can get rid of for you? I listened to the foreman, the people with dirt on their boots, and I acted on their suggestions. I spent evenings locked in the conference room with Jessica Miller, our sharp-as-a-tack CFO. Together, we performed a financial autopsy on the company, going through the books line by line. We cut the fat, the club memberships, the vanity projects, the salaries for ghost employees. We redirected that capital to where it was needed, new equipment, better safety gear, and raises for our most underpaid, high-performing staff. Ethan and I finally implemented the state-of-the-art project management software I had been begging my father to invest in for years. The transition was painful. People complained. But within 2 months, the results were undeniable. Projects started finishing on time and often under budget. For the first time in years, the company was financially healthy. The biggest change I made was instituting a company-wide profit-sharing program. At the end of each quarter, a percentage of the company's profits was distributed to every single employee, from the receptionists to the site laborers. The message was simple. When the company wins, everyone wins. The atmosphere began to shift, slowly, from one of entrenched cynicism to one of cautious, then genuine buy-in. People started to care again. My biological family was a distant echo in this new, demanding life. My mother refused to take my calls. My father and I communicated only through the terse, formal language of lawyers as we finalized the transfer of power. Jake, I heard, had hit rock bottom and bounced. After storming out of the boardroom, he'd gone on a multi-week bender that ended with a wrecked car and a DUI. It was the public humiliation, the loss of his financial lifeline, and the confrontation with his own uselessness that finally broke through his thick skull of arrogance. He checked himself into a 90-day rehab facility in Arizona. About 5 months after the takeover, I got a call from my assistant, her voice hesitant. "Michael, your brother is in the lobby. He's asking to see you." I agreed, my own curiosity warring with my apprehension. I met him in the main conference room, the same room that had been our battlefield. The change in him was shocking. He was thinner, his skin pale. The expensive, flashy clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a nondescript polo shirt. The arrogant smirk that had been his permanent accessory was gone, replaced by a deep, haunted sadness in his eyes. "Michael," he said, his voice quiet and raspy. He couldn't meet my gaze, staring instead at the polished surface of the table. I don't really know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Jake," I said, keeping my own voice neutral. "No, I do," he insisted, finally forcing himself to look up at me. His eyes were clear for the first time in years. "I'm sorry. I know how useless that word is, but it's the only one I've got. I was weak, and I hated you for being strong. Every time you succeeded at something, it felt like it was highlighting my own failures. So I tried to make you smaller. I tried to tear you down." He shook his head, a look of self-disgust on his face. "I was a black hole. I just wanted to suck everything down with me." I stayed silent, letting him own the moment. This wasn't for me. It was for him. "What do you want, Jake?" I asked finally. "A chance," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A chance to work. I'll do anything. I'll sweep the floors. I'll fetch coffee. I'll clean the toilets. I need to learn how to build one thing in my life instead of breaking everything I touch." The old Michael would have been suspicious. But looking at the broken, humbled man in front of me, I saw a flicker of something new. Sincerity. "Sal's crew has an opening for a general laborer on the new downtown site," I said. "The pay is $18 an hour. Work starts at 6 a.m. It's hard, physical labor, and you'll get no special treatment. You'll be just another guy on the crew. If you're 1 minute late, Sal will have your hide. Are you sure you want that?" A flicker of profound, unadulterated relief passed over his face. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." The final pillar of my old life fell into place a month later. My father called and asked me to have lunch. We met at a simple diner, the kind of place he wouldn't have been caught dead in a year ago. He looked smaller. The imposing, granite-like presence was gone, replaced by the weary slump of an old man. We ate in silence for a while, the clatter of cutlery filling the space between us. "The profit-sharing reports came out," he said finally, staring into his coffee cup. "It's a good idea, Michael. A very good idea. Something I should have done 20 years ago." "It's helping," I said simply. He put his spoon down and looked at me, his gaze direct and filled with a deep, weary sadness. "I was wrong," he said. the 3 words coming out as if they were heavy, rusted objects he had to haul up from the bottom of a well. I was so busy trying to recapture my own youth, seeing myself in Jake's bravado, that I forgot what leadership actually is. It's not about being the charming guy in the room. It's about being the guy who stays all night to fix the foundation. It's the steady hand. It's the hard work. He took a shaky breath. I spent years trying to make you into a version of me. I failed to see that you were already a version of your grandfather. A better version. I was so busy looking for a reflection, I missed the real legacy standing right in front of me. It was the validation I had craved my entire life. And when it finally came, it didn't feel like a triumphant victory. It felt like an armistice. A quiet, sad, and necessary end to a very long war. We could never go back to what we were. But for the very first time, it felt like we had a chance to build something new. It's been over a year now since that lunch at the diner. The world keeps turning, and life, surprisingly, finds a new kind of normal. Anderson and Partners is no longer a struggling patient. It's a healthy, growing enterprise. We've landed 2 new multi-million-dollar contracts, one not because of a family name, but because our bids were smarter, our technology was better, and our reputation for delivering on our promises was rock solid. The profit-sharing checks get bigger every quarter, and the culture of shared success is palpable. Jake is still on Sal's crew. He shows up at 5:45 a.m. every single day. He works hard. He doesn't complain. He's earned the grudging respect of the other guys on the crew, who no longer see him as the boss's son, but just as Jake, the guy who can haul rebar as well as any of them. I see him sometimes at company events. We don't talk much, but there's a quiet, tentative respect between us now, the kind that can only be built on a foundation of action, not words. He's learning the business from the concrete up. He's finally building something. My mother and I are speaking. It's not like it was before, and for that, I'm grateful. The conversations are careful, focused on the present. We talk about Sarah's new obsession with growing heirloom tomatoes, or a movie I saw. We don't talk about the past. It's a fragile truce, but it's better than the Cold War that preceded it. My father and I still have lunch once a month. He's fully retired now, and it seems to suit him. He doesn't offer unsolicited business advice anymore. Instead, he asks me questions about my life. He listens. In his old age, he's finally learning how to be a father, not just a CEO who happened to live in the same house. A few weeks ago, I was standing on the skeletal top floor of a new 30-story office building we're constructing downtown. It was late evening, and the sun was a fiery orange ball sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in dramatic shades of purple and gold. Below me, the city lights were beginning to glitter, a sprawling galaxy of human endeavor. I looked down at the strong steel framework beneath my feet, the solid, unyielding bones of the skyscraper. I thought about that word that had haunted me for so long. Legacy. For most of my life, I believed legacy was a thing you inherited, a birthright passed down from father to son. A name on a sign, a company, a history. But standing there, high above the city, I realized the truth. Legacy isn't what you're given. It's what you build. It's in the foundations you lay, both in steel and in the lives of the people you lead. It's in the trust you earn through your actions, not your words. It's in the quiet satisfaction of looking at something you have created with your own mind, your own integrity, and your own 2 hands, and knowing that it's strong, it's true, and it is unapologetically yours. I didn't win a company. I didn't lose a family. I simply fought for the right to build my own life on my own terms. And in the process, I learned that the most important foundation you can ever build is the one within yourself. A foundation of self-worth that no one can ever take away from you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for your own value against the people who were supposed to support you the most? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.